It was supposed to be just another normal day at school, but for Maya Turner, everything changed in an instant. When the principal called her into the office, Maya had no idea that a simple decision about her hairstyle would lead to her suspension. What started as an unfair punishment soon turned into a battle for respect, identity, and the very rights of every student at Cedar Grove High. And little did they know, Maya wasn't backing down. This fight would change everything. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing stories. It was just another ordinary day at Cedar Grove High, where students filled the hallways with the usual chatter and laughter. Yet for 15-year-old Maya Turner, this day would soon take an unexpected turn. Maya walked through the school doors with her head held high, a quiet sense of confidence radiating from her. She was wearing a simple white blouse and dark jeans, her braids neatly pulled back into a stylish, intricate pattern. To Maya, her braids were more than just a hairstyle. They were a part of who she was, a reflection of her heritage, a symbol of pride in her Black identity. She was used to the looks people gave her when she wore her hair like this, some curious, some admiring, and some perhaps judging. But Maya didn't care. She had learned long ago to embrace her culture with pride, regardless of what others thought. Her classmates had mostly accepted her unique style, and today, like any other, Maya was ready to go to class. As she made her way through the crowded hall, her friend Jada caught up with her, giving her a warm smile. "Those braids are fire, Maya," Jada said, admiring the intricate design Maya had chosen for the day. Maya grinned and thanked her, feeling proud. But little did she know, as she walked through the halls of Cedar Grove High, a storm was brewing that would soon change everything. The principal, Mrs. Clark, a woman known for her strict adherence to the school's policies, had already taken notice of Maya's braids earlier that morning. Mrs. Clark was a no-nonsense type of leader, always ensuring that the school's uniform rules were followed to the letter. She had a reputation for enforcing rules without much room for flexibility or understanding of the cultural nuances students sometimes brought with them. When Maya walked into her first class, she was oblivious to the fact that Mrs. Clark had been watching her from afar. The principal's eyes narrowed when she saw Maya's braids once again. She had heard whispers from a few teachers that the braids were too elaborate and didn't align with the school's image. To Mrs. Clark, rules were rules, and no exception could be made, not even for something as seemingly harmless as a hairstyle. Maya didn't fit the typical uniform look she had grown used to seeing in the school. Her confidence was something that Mrs. Clark didn't quite understand, and soon it would lead to a decision she would come to regret. Just after the bell rang, signaling the start of the second period, Maya was called to the principal's office. Confused, she made her way through the quiet halls, her steps slow and deliberate. It wasn't unusual to be called to the office, but Maya had never been in trouble before. She didn't expect anything major. Perhaps it was a routine check on her grades or some minor issue. But as she entered the principal's office and saw Mrs. Clark standing behind her desk, Maya's gut twisted. Mrs. Clark had a stern look on her face, a look that told Maya that something wasn't right. "Maya, come in," Mrs. Clark said, her tone colder than usual. Maya entered and stood in front of the desk, feeling a wave of unease wash over her. She tried to smile, but the principal's serious expression made it impossible to shake the feeling that something was wrong. "I've noticed your hairstyle," Mrs. Clark began, her voice strict. "It doesn't align with the school's dress code. I understand that you may see it as part of your culture, but it is disruptive to the image we are trying to maintain here at Cedar Grove." Maya's heart raced. "I don't understand," she said, trying to stay calm. "These braids are part of my heritage. It's not just a hairstyle. It's something important to me." Mrs. Clark's eyes hardened. "I understand that you may have personal reasons, but the rules are clear. This is not allowed in school. I'm afraid I'll have to suspend you for the day until your hair is in compliance with the dress code." Maya's breath caught in her throat. She had never been suspended before, and she never imagined that her culture, something that had always been part of her, would be used against her. She opened her mouth to speak, to explain further, but the words caught in her throat. It was as if the principal had already made up her mind. This wasn't about understanding. It was about enforcing rules. Maya's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in disbelief. She had always been respectful of the rules, but this felt different. This felt personal. The principal's judgment was clear, and Maya knew she wasn't going to win this battle with words. The only thing she could do was comply, but as she walked out of the office to gather her things, her mind began to race. What would her mom think? How would she explain this at home? And then a quiet determination began to stir within her. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Maya gathered her belongings and walked back to her locker with a heavy heart. The suspension wasn't something she ever imagined would happen to her. As she closed the locker door, the weight of the situation started to settle in. Her thoughts raced, wondering how this had escalated so quickly. She'd worn her braids proudly for as long as she could remember, never once thinking there would be an issue at school. But now, as she thought about the suspension and how her heritage had been dismissed so easily, something inside her clicked. This wasn't just about her braids, it was about respect. And it was about the way some people seemed to think they had the right to define what was acceptable for others. She pulled out her phone, feeling the urge to call her mom. Maya's mom, LaToya, was always there for her. The bond they shared was unshakable, and LaToya had always taught Maya the importance of standing up for herself and her culture. She dialed the number and waited, pacing the hall as the phone rang. "Hey, baby, what's up?" LaToya's voice was warm and soothing, a stark contrast to the anxious feeling bubbling inside Maya. "Mom, something happened today." Maya started, her voice faltering. "I was suspended for wearing my braids." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Maya could practically hear her mom processing the information. LaToya's voice finally spoke again, calm but firm. "Suspended? For your braids? That's ridiculous, Maya. Don't worry, we'll handle this. I'll be there in a few minutes. Get your things and meet me outside." Maya's heart lifted a little. Her mom had this way of making everything feel like it would be okay, even when it seemed like the world was falling apart. But this time, Maya could sense that LaToya wasn't just angry, she was determined. Maya knew that when her mom said she was coming, things were about to change. Maya walked outside, standing by the entrance, waiting for LaToya to arrive. As she glanced at the school's entrance, her mind was still in turmoil, replaying the conversation with Mrs. Clark over and over again. The words, "doesn't align with the school's dress code," kept echoing in her mind. It was as if those words were a slap to her identity, something that she had never expected from a place that was supposed to be a sanctuary for learning and growth. When LaToya pulled up in her car, Maya immediately got in, but before she could say a word, her mom spoke up. "We're not letting this slide, Maya," LaToya said, her voice sharp and clear. "We're going straight to the school, and I'm going to make sure this gets handled. I'm calling in some help, and this won't be the last they hear of it." Maya's mind raced as she tried to process everything. Her mom's words gave her a sense of relief, but also anticipation. Whatever was about to happen, Maya knew this was just the beginning of something bigger. They weren't going to let the principal's unfair decision stand. Maya looked out the window, the cool air rushing by as they sped toward Cedar Grove High, feeling both nervous and empowered all at once. She had no idea what LaToya had planned, but she trusted her mom completely. Whatever was about to happen next, it was clear that the principal's judgment was about to be questioned in a way she never expected. As the car pulled into the school parking lot, Maya couldn't help but feel a mix of dread and curiosity. She had no idea what her mom had planned, but one thing was clear: this wasn't going to be a normal meeting. LaToya parked the car close to the front entrance and turned off the engine. She took a deep breath, her face determined. Maya, still unsure of what exactly was happening, followed her mother into the building. The air inside Cedar Grove High was as quiet as it had been earlier, but now Maya noticed the tension that seemed to hang around every corner. Her eyes darted from one student to another, some of them already whispering behind their hands, no doubt gossiping about the situation. It wasn't the first time Maya had felt like an outsider, but today felt different. She wasn't just an individual student anymore. She was a symbol, a target, and her mom wasn't about to let it go unnoticed. They walked through the school's halls, making their way to the principal's office. Maya could feel the weight of every step they took, the footsteps echoing in the empty hall as if they were walking into a battle. When they reached the office door, LaToya paused, turning to Maya with a soft smile that held no trace of the fury she was feeling inside. "Stay calm, sweetheart," LaToya said quietly, her hand resting on Maya's shoulder. "I've got this." Maya nodded, though a knot formed in her stomach. She had never seen her mom so resolute, and while it gave her comfort, it also made her realize just how serious this was. The door to the principal's office was already open when they arrived, and inside, Mrs. Clark was sitting at her desk, going over some papers. She looked up in surprise when LaToya walked in, but her expression quickly turned to one of feigned politeness. "Mrs. Turner, what a surprise," Mrs. Clark said, standing up. "I wasn't expecting to see you here today. I'm sure Maya explained everything to you." LaToya wasted no time with pleasantries. "I'm here because my daughter has been wrongfully suspended," she said firmly, her voice steady, but with an edge that made it clear this was not a casual conversation. Mrs. Clark blinked, taken aback by the force in LaToya's tone. "I understand you may be upset, but the rules are very clear." LaToya didn't let her finish. "The rules are not above common sense or cultural respect. Maya's braids are not just a hairstyle, they're a part of her identity, her heritage. I'm sure you didn't consider that when you made your decision to suspend her, did you?" Mrs. Clark looked uncomfortable, but she tried to maintain control. "I was simply following school policy," she muttered, her eyes flicking nervously to the side. "The dress code is there for a reason." LaToya's expression grew colder. "A policy that doesn't respect cultural differences? A policy that has no room for the individuality of black students? You've made a mistake, Mrs. Clark, and I'm here to make sure that mistake gets corrected." Before Mrs. Clark could respond, LaToya reached into her bag and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the desk. Mrs. Clark's eyes widened as she glanced at the card. It was from a well-known federal lawyer, someone who specialized in civil rights cases. LaToya's eyes never wavered as she met the principal's gaze. "You'll be hearing from him soon," LaToya continued. "And if this suspension isn't reversed immediately, I'll be taking this further. This is not just about Maya's braids. It's about accountability, respect, and fairness. Do you understand?" Mrs. Clark opened her mouth, but no words came out. She was speechless, the sudden weight of the situation sinking in. The principal had clearly underestimated LaToya, and now it seemed as though the tables had turned. Mrs. Clark tried to regain her composure, but it was obvious that her confidence had crumbled. She was no longer in control of the situation. LaToya stood her ground, her posture unwavering. Maya, though still nervous, felt a sense of pride swell within her. Her mom wasn't just standing up for her, she was standing up for what was right. Maya had never felt so seen, so protected, and so empowered. The silence in the room grew thick, almost suffocating, as Mrs. Clark stared at the card in front of her. The sudden realization that she had made a grave mistake was written all over her face. She cleared her throat, trying to regain some sense of control, but LaToya's presence was commanding, and the principal couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something much larger was unfolding in front of her. I I understand your concerns," Mrs. Clark stammered, but it was clear her confidence had completely evaporated. She glanced at Maya, then back at the business card, and finally her gaze dropped to her desk as if hoping to find a way out of the awkward situation. "But I still don't see how the dress code doesn't apply here." Latoya's voice was calm, but there was an undeniable strength in it. "This isn't about your dress code, Mrs. Clark. This is about discrimination. This is about understanding that cultural expression is not something to be dismissed with a policy that doesn't account for diversity. Braids are part of Maya's identity. They're a part of who she is. And by suspending her, you've insulted that identity." Maya watched her mom carefully. Latoya's words were like a force, pushing back against the principal's rigid stance. It was as though her mother was peeling back the layers of authority that Mrs. Clark had built around herself, exposing her ignorance and disregard for Maya's culture. Maya's hands trembled slightly, but she remained silent, knowing that this was no longer just about a suspension, it was about fighting for her right to exist as she was. Mrs. Clark, now visibly uncomfortable, shuffled through some papers on her desk. "I see," she said, her voice lacking conviction. "I wasn't aware that this was such a sensitive issue. Perhaps I overstepped?" Latoya's expression didn't soften. "You didn't overstep. You made a judgment based on ignorance. And that's unacceptable, especially in an environment that is supposed to foster growth and understanding. You're in a position of authority, Mrs. Clark. You should be encouraging diversity, not stifling it." There was a long pause as Mrs. Clark processed the words. She opened her mouth to speak again, but nothing came out. Her usual sharp tone and demeanor had been replaced by something else, something Maya had never seen before. The principal was rattled, clearly unsure of how to handle the situation. She had expected Latoya to be just another upset parent, perhaps someone to placate with a few apologies and assurances. But this was different. Latoya wasn't asking for an apology. She was demanding justice. Latoya stood tall, her voice unwavering. "I'm giving you a choice. You can either reverse the suspension now and we can leave here with this resolved, or I will make sure this goes public, and we'll see how the school handles being accused of racial discrimination." Maya's breath hitched in her throat as she heard the words. This wasn't just about standing up for her anymore. Her mother was ready to take this all the way. Maya had never seen her mom so determined, and a part of her, despite the chaos, felt a growing sense of pride. Mrs. Clark finally looked up, her face pale. I'll reverse the suspension," she said quietly, her voice almost inaudible. The words felt hollow, like a last-ditch effort to salvage whatever dignity she had left. Latoya didn't respond right away. She simply reached over, took the business card back, and slid it into her bag. "Good," she said, her tone still firm, "but this isn't over. I expect you to review your policies immediately and ensure that no student, especially not my daughter, faces this kind of disrespect again." Mrs. Clark nodded, still stunned, not daring to speak any further. She knew that the battle was over for today, but the war had only just begun. Latoya turned to Maya and gave her a reassuring smile. "Let's go, baby. This is over for now." But Maya could see the fire in her mom's eyes, the quiet resolve that made it clear this was far from the end. As they left the principal's office, Maya's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and amazement. Her mom had stood up for her in a way she hadn't expected. Latoya had not only defended Maya's right to express herself, but had sent a message to the school that no one could ignore. As they walked down the hallway toward the exit, the whispers that had followed them earlier had quieted down. Maya knew that the ripple effect of what had just happened would be felt long after they left. The principal might have reversed the suspension, but the truth had been exposed, and it was only a matter of time before the school, and perhaps others, would have to reckon with their actions. As they stepped outside into the bright afternoon sun, Maya felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She had expected to feel angry or frustrated, but instead, there was an overwhelming sense of calm. Her mom's actions had been powerful, and she couldn't help but feel proud of how Latoya had handled everything. But as they made their way to the car, Maya realized something important. This wasn't just about her anymore. Her mom had opened a door, one that would likely force the school to think long and hard about their policies moving forward. She couldn't just walk away and forget about what had happened. "Do you think they'll actually change the dress code?" Maya asked, breaking the silence as she climbed into the passenger seat. Latoya started the car, her hands steady on the wheel. "I don't know, baby, but one thing's for sure. Their actions will be under a microscope now. They'll have to think twice before they make decisions like that again. We're not going to let this slide." Maya nodded, her mind racing. The suspension had been a slap in the face, but now it felt like something much bigger was in motion. It wasn't just about standing up for herself anymore. It was about making sure no other student, no other person, would have to face the same kind of treatment. She was no longer just fighting for her braids. She was fighting for a change in the way people viewed her, her culture, and everyone who shared it. Latoya pulled into their driveway, but before Maya could open the door, her phone buzzed. It was a text from her best friend Jada. "Maya, I just heard what happened. Are you okay? The whole school's talking about it." Maya read the message and quickly typed back, "I'm fine. Mom's got this handled. But it's not over yet. They've got to change the way they treat us." Her phone buzzed again, this time a response from Jada. "You're a boss, girl. I know your mom's a force, but don't let them get away with it. Keep pushing." Maya smiled. Jada's support meant the world to her, and she was right. This wasn't just about getting the suspension reversed. It was about standing up, not only for herself but for every student who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong because of the way they looked or where they came from. As Maya walked into the house, she found Latoya already on the phone, speaking in a low, serious tone. Maya could hear snippets of the conversation, something about contacting a lawyer, a possible press release, and making sure the school followed through on their promises. Latoya saw Maya enter and gave her a quick, reassuring smile. She finished the call and turned to her daughter. "I've got a few things to handle, but we're not done here. I'm calling in a favor from some people I know. If the school thinks they can just sweep this under the rug, they've got another thing coming." Maya sat down at the kitchen table, a mixture of awe and relief filling her chest. She had known her mom was strong, but this was different. Latoya wasn't just advocating for Maya, she was making sure the school understood the gravity of what they'd done. She was fighting not just for one student, but for a change in the entire system. For the first time, Maya realized how deeply personal this was, not just for her, but for her mom too. Latoya had worked hard her entire life to make sure Maya had every opportunity to succeed. Now she was fighting to make sure Maya and students like her could walk through those school doors without fear of being judged for something as simple as a hairstyle. As Latoya hung up the phone, she turned to Maya with a smile. "It's going to get a little loud around here soon, but we'll be fine. Just know that you're not alone in this." Maya smiled back, her heart swelling with pride. "I know, Mom, I know." The day had been exhausting, but it felt like a turning point. Maya didn't know what would happen next, but she was ready for it. Her braids were a part of who she was, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. Later that evening, as Maya sat in her room, the weight of the day began to settle in. The adrenaline that had been pumping through her veins all afternoon was slowly fading, leaving her exhausted, but filled with a sense of accomplishment. She had always known that standing up for herself wouldn't be easy, but today, with her mom's strength and determination, it felt like they had made a real impact. Maya opened her laptop, staring at the blank screen in front of her. She wanted to do something, anything, to make sure this moment wasn't just a one-time thing. As she scrolled through her social media feed, she saw post after post about the incident. Word had clearly spread fast. Some people were supportive, others weren't so sure, but there was one thing Maya couldn't deny. Everyone was talking about it, and that meant the issue was far from over. Just as she was about to close her laptop and take a break, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was from her mom. "Maya, I just spoke with the lawyer. He's going to contact the school board first thing in the morning. Don't worry about anything. I've got this under control." Maya read the message and felt a little lighter. Her mom had a way of making everything seem like it was going to be okay. Even though Maya had always trusted her mom, there was still a part of her that couldn't help but wonder, what would happen next? Would the school board really take this seriously? Would they change their policies? The uncertainty made her restless, so she decided to call Jada. Maybe talking to her would help take her mind off everything. When Jada answered, her voice was full of energy. "Maya, girl, I've been hearing all kinds of stuff. Are you okay? What happened after your mom left the school?" Maya smiled, grateful for her friend's concern. "I'm fine, Jada. Mom's handling everything. She's already on the phone with lawyers and even talked to the school board. It's crazy, but I know she's got it." Jada let out a relieved sigh. "That's awesome. But you know what? I was talking to some people at school today. A lot of folks were shocked by the whole thing. But some of them said they didn't even know your braids were such a big deal. Like, they didn't realize it could get you suspended." Maya paused. "Exactly. That's the problem. People don't get it. They don't understand how something as simple as my hair can be a big deal. It's just part of who I am." "Well," Jada continued, "it looks like you're teaching them something. People are starting to notice. A lot of the teachers are actually talking about it too. I think they're starting to realize that there's more to the story than just a dress code violation." Maya felt a sense of pride swell in her chest. It was one thing to have her mom's support, but hearing that others were starting to understand made her feel like this wasn't just a fight for her. It was a fight for all of them. "I guess that's the point," Maya said, her voice growing stronger. "I don't want anyone to have to go through what I did today. It's not just about my braids. It's about being treated fairly and with respect." Jada's voice softened. "You're really something, you know that? You've got this, Maya. We've got this." The conversation ended, but Maya felt lighter, more certain. The support from Jada and the growing realization that more people were starting to see what had happened made her believe that real change was possible. The school might not have expected this level of attention, but now that it was out there, it couldn't be ignored. As Maya set her phone down and lay back on her bed, she glanced at the picture of her and her mom on the wall, her mom smiling proudly at a school event years ago, Maya's small hands clutching the trophy she had won for a speech competition. In that moment, Maya realized how much her mom had always fought for her, how much she had worked to make sure Maya had everything she needed. And now, Maya was seeing the full extent of that fight. Everything her mom had taught her, everything she had stood for, was coming to a head. Maya closed her eyes, letting the thoughts swirl in her mind. Tomorrow would be another day and the fight wasn't over yet. But one thing was certain, she was ready. And she knew that with her mom by her side, no one would be able to silence her or dismiss her ever again. The battle for respect, for cultural understanding, and for equality had just begun, and Maya Turner was at the center of it. The next morning, Maya woke up to a buzzing phone. It was still early, but she couldn't shake the restlessness from the night before. After reading the series of messages from her mom, she felt a wave of relief. Her mom had been busy all night, making calls and preparing for what she expected to be a fight. "The lawyer's on board, Maya. The school board's going to hear from him this afternoon. You've done well by standing up for yourself, but now it's time for the school to do some real soul-searching. Don't worry, I'm on this." LaToya's text read. Maya felt a rush of gratitude for her mom, but also a sense of nervous anticipation. She had no idea what would happen next, but she knew it wouldn't be quiet. It was clear that things were about to escalate, and for the first time in her life, Maya was at the center of something bigger than herself. After breakfast, Latoya made sure to check in with Maya before heading out to the school. "I'm leaving now. Make sure you keep your head up, baby. They may try to downplay it, but this is not just about you anymore. It's about all the students who've been made to feel like they don't belong because of their hair, their culture, or their background. You've started something." Maya nodded, even though Latoya couldn't see her. The idea that she was starting something made her nervous but also proud. She had a role to play in a much larger conversation, one that might reach farther than just her school or even the city. The day went by slowly, every class feeling longer than the last. Maya couldn't focus. The stares from her classmates were harder to ignore. Some were curious, others seemed uncomfortable, and a few were downright judgmental. But amidst all the whispers and the stares, there was one thing that kept her grounded. She wasn't alone. As the bell rang for lunch, Maya found herself walking toward the cafeteria with Jada, who had been her rock through all of this. Jada had been the first to speak out, the first to offer support when Maya had walked into school that morning, her braids a target. "Are you nervous?" Jada asked, as they sat down at their usual table. Maya took a deep breath, staring down at her lunch tray. "I don't even know what to expect. I mean, Mom's handling it, but what if the school just brushes it off? What if they don't really care about what happened?" Jada shook her head. "No way. This is bigger than just a suspension. You're standing up for yourself and everyone else who's been told their culture doesn't matter. You've got people talking, Maya. They can't just ignore that." Maya looked around at the students eating, laughing, and talking. There was a certain unease in the air, a quiet murmur that had nothing to do with the usual lunchtime gossip. But Jada was right. People were talking. Maya might not know how everything would unfold, but she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't something the school could brush under the rug. By the time school ended, Maya was exhausted, but she wasn't ready to go home. She had to know what was happening. Her mom had said the lawyer would be contacting the school board, and she had heard rumors that there were meetings taking place behind closed doors. Maya couldn't sit still with so much uncertainty in the air, so she decided to wait for Latoya in the parking lot. As the last bell rang, signaling the end of the day, Maya made her way out of the school building. She found a quiet spot by the entrance, near the benches where students sometimes waited for rides. The wind was chilly, and she pulled her jacket tighter around her, feeling the cool air against her skin. Minutes later, Latoya's car pulled into the parking lot and Maya's heart skipped a beat. Her mom's car always had a reassuring presence, even in times like this. When Latoya stepped out of the car, her expression was unreadable, but her walk was confident, purposeful. Maya didn't need to ask. She knew something had happened. "Mom?" Maya asked, as Latoya approached. Her voice was soft, hesitant. Latoya gave her a reassuring smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I spoke with the school board. They're reviewing the situation. They know this isn't going away. The lawyer made it clear that if they don't address the issue seriously, we'll be taking this further." Maya felt a knot of relief in her stomach, but also a lingering tension. "What does that mean? Are they really going to change things?" Latoya paused, her expression hardening. "They don't have a choice now, Maya. The lawyer has already gathered all the evidence, and the school can't afford to be seen as discriminatory, especially not with the way this has gone public." Maya looked up at her mom, her heart swelling with pride. This wasn't just about the suspension anymore. Latoya wasn't just fighting for Maya's rights. She was making sure that no one else would face this kind of discrimination again. "I'm proud of you, Mom," Maya said quietly, her voice filled with emotion. Latoya smiled down at her daughter, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. "We're not done yet, but this is just the beginning. We're going to make sure they learn from this, and more importantly, we'll make sure they do better by all the students here." Maya nodded, feeling a wave of determination wash over her. For the first time in a long while, she knew exactly what she needed to do next. This wasn't just about her braids. It was about standing up for herself, for others, and for a future where no one would be made to feel small because of their identity. As they got into the car, Maya felt the weight of what was to come. This fight had only just begun. But one thing was clear. She wasn't backing down. And with her mom by her side, nothing could stop them now. The following day, Maya woke up with a sense of resolve she hadn't felt before. It was as though something inside her had shifted. The uncertainty from the past few days had begun to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence. Her mom had been a steady source of strength, and now Maya was ready to take her own stand, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been told their culture didn't belong. After breakfast, LaToya dropped Maya off at school, but today felt different. The usual hustle and bustle of the morning didn't feel as loud. As she walked through the entrance, Maya could sense the tension hanging in the air. A few students glanced her way, their eyes filled with curiosity. Some of the teachers seemed to be avoiding eye contact, and others were giving her sympathetic smiles. She had become the center of attention, but it didn't bother her like it had before. She made her way to her first class, taking a deep breath before entering the room. The moment she stepped inside, all eyes turned toward her. The whispers, the sideways glances, they were there, but Maya didn't flinch. She stood tall, her braids a proud symbol of who she was, a part of her identity that no one would take from her. Her first period passed in a blur, the usual lesson moving in and out of focus, as her mind kept drifting back to what was happening outside the classroom walls. The school was buzzing with rumors. Some were about the suspension and the lawyer, others about possible changes to the dress code. But the one thing everyone seemed to agree on was that things weren't going to stay the same. By the time the bell rang for lunch, Maya's nerves were frayed. She hadn't heard from her mom yet, but LaToya had promised to keep her updated on any developments. Maya headed straight to the cafeteria, where she spotted Jada immediately. "Maya, you won't believe what's going on," Jada said, her voice filled with excitement. Maya sat down across from her, her heart pounding in her chest. "What? What's happening?" "The whole school is talking about it. The principal's been avoiding everyone, and there's this huge meeting later today with the school board. People are saying they're going to address the dress code, and some teachers are even talking about revising it to make sure it's more inclusive." Maya's breath caught in her throat. "Really? That's a huge deal. Do you think it'll actually happen?" "I don't know. But the buzz is real. Everyone's been talking about how unfair the suspension was. It's getting louder, Maya. People are listening." Maya's heart swelled with pride. This wasn't just her fight anymore. The school was beginning to see what had happened, and that gave her hope. She glanced around the cafeteria, noting the way some students were talking about the situation, even discussing the lawyer who had been involved. Some were clearly against the idea of changing the dress code, but there was a growing number who were starting to understand why it needed to happen. Jada leaned in, her voice lowering. "Whatever happens, you've already made a mark, Maya. You've changed things." Maya felt the weight of her words sink in. She had done more than just stand up for herself. She had sparked a conversation, a ripple that was starting to spread throughout the school. The next steps were unclear, but Maya was more determined than ever to see this through. The afternoon dragged on as Maya waited for the school board meeting to end. She could feel the anticipation in the air. Every passing moment seemed to stretch longer than the last, and by the time the final bell rang, she was on edge. Her phone buzzed in her pocket just as she stood up to leave class, and she quickly pulled it out. It was a text from LaToya. "Maya, I just heard from the lawyer. The school board is taking the matter seriously. They're reviewing the dress code policy, and they're going to make some immediate changes. They're also going to issue a formal apology to you tomorrow." Maya's heart skipped a beat. She reread the message twice, as if making sure she hadn't misunderstood. The lawyer also mentioned they're setting up a meeting to discuss changes to how cultural expressions are handled in the future. Your mom's been a force on this. You've got to be proud. The sense of relief that washed over her was immediate, but it didn't last long. She couldn't relax just yet. An apology and a policy change were steps in the right direction, but it was more than that. Maya knew that real change had to come from a place of understanding, not just compliance. As she made her way to the parking lot, Maya felt a new wave of nervous energy. Her mom had worked tirelessly to make sure the school would be held accountable, but Maya now understood that her fight was far from over. The changes that were happening were important, but the real test would be how the school responded once the spotlight was no longer on them. Would they truly honor the changes, or would this just be a temporary fix? When she climbed into LaToya's car, she could see the tiredness in her mom's eyes, but also a quiet satisfaction. LaToya gave her a quick smile before turning to start the engine. "How did it go?" Maya asked, eager for the details. "We're making progress," LaToya said, her voice tired but strong. "The board is committed to making changes to the policy, and they're drafting a statement to be sent out tomorrow. But the bigger work starts now. This isn't just about a single incident. It's about making sure this never happens again." Maya nodded, her mind racing. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But they had made their mark, and now they had a chance to make sure this story wasn't just a blip in the school's history. She wasn't just fighting for her own dignity anymore. She was fighting for all the students who came after her, the ones who deserved to walk through the doors of their school without fear of being judged for who they were. As LaToya drove through the quiet streets, Maya gazed out the window, feeling a quiet sense of purpose settle over her. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Change was on the horizon, and Maya Turner was going to make sure it stayed that way. The next morning, Maya's alarm went off earlier than usual, but she didn't mind. Today was going to be different. The whole school had been talking about the board meeting the day before, and Maya knew she was walking into a school that was on the verge of change. As she got dressed, she couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and nerves. She had no idea what the day would bring, but she was ready for whatever came next. LaToya was already in the kitchen when Maya came downstairs, a cup of coffee in hand. She looked up at her daughter, her expression soft but serious. "Today's important, Maya," LaToya said, her voice calm. "Whatever happens, just remember, this is about something much bigger than you. It's about setting a precedent, not just for you, but for every student who feels like they don't belong." Maya nodded, feeling the weight of her mom's words. "I get it. I'm ready, Mom. Let's make sure they get it right this time." After breakfast, they left for school, the car ride filled with a sense of quiet anticipation. The air outside was crisp, and as they drove past the familiar streets, Maya's thoughts swirled with the events of the past week. She had no idea how long it would take for the changes to take full effect, but she knew that every step counted. They were making history, even if it didn't feel that way yet. When they arrived at school, the usual hustle of students walking through the parking lot was replaced with a quiet tension. Maya could feel eyes on her as she walked through the front entrance. It wasn't just the students this time. There were teachers, staff members, and even some administrators who seemed to be watching her. But instead of the uncomfortable stares she had grown used to, today felt different. Today felt like the beginning of something new. As Maya walked to her first class, she passed by a group of students gathered near the lockers. One of them, a girl named Emily, who had never spoken to Maya before, looked at her with a soft smile. "I just wanted to say, what you did yesterday was really brave," Emily said, her voice sincere. "I don't know if I would have been able to stand up like that." Maya smiled back, feeling a warmth in her chest. "Thanks. It wasn't easy, but it had to be done." As she entered the classroom, she saw a few of her classmates glance up at her, some of them nodding in acknowledgement. Maya could sense a shift in the air. People were starting to see her, not just as the girl who got suspended, but as someone who stood up for what was right. She wasn't just a student anymore, she was a voice for change. The day moved slowly, but Maya felt every moment weigh heavier than the last. Every time the bell rang and a new class began, she couldn't shake the feeling that something big was coming. As she walked between classes, she could hear murmurs from other students. It wasn't just idle gossip this time, it was conversations about change, about fairness, and about respect. The air was filled with the unspoken question, how would the school handle this? By lunch, the tension in the cafeteria was palpable. Maya made her way to the table where Jada was already sitting. A few other friends gathered around her. But it wasn't the usual chatter. Today, the conversation was different. People were talking about the dress code, the suspension, and the lawyer who had gotten involved. Maya sat down and listened, as a few students debated whether the school was truly going to make changes. Some were skeptical, others hopeful, but everyone was engaged in the conversation. Maya couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of satisfaction. This was it. The ripple effect was spreading. As she was about to take a bite of her lunch, her phone buzzed with a new text from Latoya. "They're making the announcement in an hour. I'll be there to meet with the school board afterward to finalize the details." Maya's stomach tightened with anticipation. It was finally happening. The board was going to address the issue publicly, and Maya could already imagine how it would unfold, how the principal, who had once seemed so certain, would have to publicly acknowledge her mistake. And not just that, there was the promise of policy change, something that would affect every student who walked through the school doors in the future. "Everything's happening today," Maya whispered, almost to herself. "It's really going to happen." Jada, who had been listening intently, raised an eyebrow. "You think they'll actually go through with it? I mean, this isn't just a small thing anymore. This has the whole school talking." Maya nodded. "It's bigger than I thought, Jada, but that's the point, right? They can't just ignore it. We're making sure they do something about it." Just as Maya finished her sentence, the loudspeaker crackled overhead, announcing that all students were to report to the auditorium immediately for an important school-wide assembly. The announcement was brief, but the message was clear. Something major was about to happen. Maya stood up from the table, her heart racing. This was it, the moment when everything would change. She glanced at Jada, who gave her a quick nod of support. "Let's go," Maya said, feeling a surge of determination. Together, they headed toward the auditorium, where Maya could hear the buzz of hundreds of students gathering. Today wasn't just another day. It was a turning point, not just for Maya, but for the entire school. As she entered the auditorium, she took a deep breath, ready to face whatever came next. As Maya entered the auditorium, she noticed the sea of students filling the rows. The usual hum of voices was replaced by a tense, expectant silence, as if everyone knew something important was about to happen. Maya could feel the weight of all those eyes on her, but this time, instead of feeling like an outsider, she felt like a catalyst for change. She walked down the aisle, trying to maintain her calm composure. Every step felt purposeful, like she was walking into the history books. Jada, who had been walking beside her, gave her a small, encouraging smile. "This is it," she whispered. "Whatever happens, you've already made a difference." Maya nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. The assembly wasn't just about what was going to happen next. It was about the fact that the school had no choice but to address the underlying issue. This wasn't just about one student's braids, it was about respect for culture and individuality in a space that was supposed to celebrate diversity. The principal, Mrs. Clark, walked onto the stage, flanked by several members of the school board. Her face was tight with anxiety, but she tried to maintain her usual stern demeanor. Maya could see the tension in her posture, the way she shifted on her feet, unsure of what to say. When the microphone came to life, Mrs. Clark cleared her throat and began speaking, her voice slightly shaky. "Good afternoon, students," she began, her eyes scanning the crowd. "Today we are here to address a situation that has recently come to light involving the school's dress code policy and the suspension of one of our students, Maya Turner." She paused, and the room seemed to hold its collective breath. Maya could feel every word like a weight on her shoulders, and yet, for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like justice was finally being served. Mrs. Clark continued, but this time her voice had softened, as though she realized the gravity of the situation. "We acknowledge that this situation has caused concern among our students, parents, and staff. We are committed to revisiting our policies to ensure that all students are treated with fairness and respect. As of today, we are making immediate changes to our dress code to ensure that cultural expression is allowed and celebrated. We will no longer tolerate any policy that restricts students' right to express themselves based on their heritage or identity." The auditorium erupted into murmurs, and Maya felt her heart race. It was happening. They were actually doing it. The room filled with whispers of approval, and Maya could see that some of the teachers and administrators in the back were nodding in agreement. Mrs. Clark paused again, taking a deep breath. "I would also like to formally apologize to Maya Turner for the misunderstanding and the distress caused by the suspension. We recognize that this was a failure in our judgment, and we are committed to making sure this never happens again." Maya's eyes widened slightly. She had expected some form of acknowledgement, but hearing the principal apologize publicly, acknowledging her mistake, it felt like a victory she hadn't anticipated. The crowd erupted into applause, and Maya could see that this moment had stirred something deeper in the room. The air felt different, like the school was on the brink of real change. Maya stood frozen, processing everything that had just been said. She had prepared herself for the apology, but hearing it out loud made the whole situation feel surreal. For the first time, she felt like the school was seeing her not as a problem to be fixed, but as a person whose identity deserved respect. It was a small victory in a world that often told her to shrink, to conform. But in this moment, she stood tall. Her eyes searched for her mom in the crowd, and she saw LaToya standing in the back, arms crossed, a proud smile playing on her lips. The sight of her mom gave Maya a renewed sense of strength. This wasn't just a victory for her, it was a victory for the countless students who had been told to hide parts of themselves to fit in, to avoid drawing attention. Today, they were all seen. After the applause died down, Mrs. Clark stepped back, and one of the school board members stepped forward to speak. "On behalf of the school board, we would like to extend our apologies as well. We are committed to reviewing not only the dress code, but also our overall policies surrounding cultural diversity. We believe every student should feel welcome, valued, and respected, regardless of their background." The applause was even louder this time, and Maya couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. She wasn't just the girl who had been suspended anymore. She was the one who had pushed the school to acknowledge their mistakes, to take action. And now, they were listening. The board member went on to explain that a committee would be formed to make sure the new policies were inclusive, and there would be mandatory cultural sensitivity training for staff members. Maya felt a small smile tug at her lips. This wasn't just about her hair, it was about changing the very foundation of the way the school operated. As the meeting drew to a close, Maya's phone buzzed with a message from her mom. "They've done it, Maya. The dress code is officially revised, and they're going to send out the formal apology today. You've made a difference. I'm so proud of you." Maya's heart soared. She had done it. It wasn't just a single battle won, it was a shift, a turning point, and this was just the beginning. After the assembly, Maya walked out of the auditorium with Jada, both of them trying to process everything that had just happened. It was hard to believe that just a few days ago, Maya had been sitting in the principal's office, suspended for something as simple as her braids. And now, not only had the school reversed that decision, but they were also implementing real, lasting change. "I can't believe this is real," Jada said, her voice filled with amazement. "It's like the entire school just flipped a switch." Maya nodded, her mind still buzzing. "Yeah, I didn't expect it to happen so fast, but I'm glad it did." As they walked outside, Maya's phone buzzed again, this time with a message from her dad. "I saw the news. Your mom told me. You're a hero. Proud of you, Maya." Maya smiled, feeling a sense of warmth spread through her. It felt surreal, knowing that her actions were not only making an impact on her own life, but were helping others as well. She had taken a stand not just for herself, but for anyone who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong because of their race, culture, or identity. As Maya and Jada sat down outside on the steps, Maya looked around at the students walking by. The air felt lighter today, like a weight had been lifted from their shoulders. Maya could feel the difference already. Even in these small moments, she was no longer the girl who had been suspended. She was the girl who had helped make a change, and that change, she knew, would ripple out beyond these walls. She glanced over at Jada, who was grinning at her. "So, what now?" Jada asked, clearly excited about the new possibilities. Maya thought for a moment, her gaze drifting to the sky. "Now we make sure this isn't just a one-time thing. We keep pushing, keep talking about it, and make sure this school, and others, know that we won't let it go." Jada gave a thumbs up. "That's what I like to hear." Maya smiled, feeling a sense of purpose that she had never felt before. She had been part of something bigger than herself, and she knew that no matter what came next, she would continue to fight for what was right. The days that followed the assembly were filled with conversations about change. Maya could feel the momentum building in the halls of Cedar Grove High, like a current that couldn't be stopped. Students who had once kept to themselves now felt empowered to speak out about their own experiences. Teachers began to show a more open-minded approach when it came to cultural expression, and some even started to ask questions about how they could make their classrooms more inclusive. Maya had no idea what to expect, but the shift was undeniable. The dress code changes had been officially put into action, and now students could wear their braids, curls, and other cultural hairstyles without fear of suspension or ridicule. But what Maya hadn't anticipated was how far the impact of this change would reach. Other students, inspired by Maya's courage, began to speak up about other issues they had faced: racism, bias, and stereotypes that had quietly existed in the school for years. It wasn't perfect, not by a long shot, but it was a start, and Maya knew that a start was all they needed. One afternoon, as she walked to her next class, Maya was approached by Mr. Williams, a teacher she had barely spoken to before. He stopped her in the hallway, a slight frown on his face. "Maya," he said, his voice low but serious, "I just wanted to thank you. The changes you're making here, they're important. You've shown a lot of people in the school, myself included, that we need to do better. I just wanted you to know I'm listening, and I'll be doing my part." Maya was taken aback by the sincerity in his voice. Mr. Williams had always seemed distant, never someone she thought would care about the dress code, but now he was standing here, admitting his own need to change. For a moment, Maya was speechless. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice carrying more weight than she expected. "I think we all just need to listen more. Everyone's got a story, and it's time we start hearing them." Mr. Williams nodded. "You're right, and I'll do better." It was moments like these that made Maya feel like the fight was worth it. The school was beginning to understand what true inclusion meant, and it wasn't just about changing policies, it was about changing minds. The ripple effect of her actions was far-reaching, and it gave Maya a sense of peace she hadn't expected to feel. The weeks passed, and the changes that Maya had sparked continued to unfold. The school board had implemented the new dress code policy. But there was more in the works. A series of diversity and cultural sensitivity training sessions were scheduled for teachers and staff, and the school began to partner with local community leaders to better understand the needs of their students. Maya found herself invited to several meetings where these changes were discussed, and each time she felt a growing sense of responsibility. She was no longer just a student who had been suspended for her braids. She was becoming an advocate, someone who could help shape the future of her school and possibly other schools as well. The feedback she received from her peers, teachers, and even parents made it clear that this fight wasn't just hers. It was a fight that many had been waiting to have, and Maya was the one who had opened the door. One afternoon, Maya was sitting in her usual spot in the cafeteria when Latoya texted her. "The school board wants to meet with us next week. They're officially adopting a new diversity and inclusion policy, and they want you to speak at the next board meeting. They're calling it Student Voices. They said your actions have made a huge impact." Maya sat back in her chair, staring at the message for a moment before a smile spread across her face. She had never imagined she would be asked to speak at a school board meeting. But now, with the support of her mom and the changes that had been set in motion, Maya knew that her voice had power, and she wasn't going to stop using it. She turned to Jada, who had been sitting beside her, and shared the news. Jada's eyes widened, her excitement clear. "You're going to kill it, Maya. You've already changed everything. Now, you get to tell everyone how you did it." Maya nodded, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. "It's not just me, Jada. It's all of us. This change is bigger than one person. It's about showing up for each other, fighting for respect, and making sure we're all seen and heard." Jada grinned, giving her a thumbs up. "I can't wait to see you up there. You've got this." Maya knew that the speech at the school board meeting would be a new chapter in this journey. She had no idea what the future held, but one thing was certain. She would keep fighting, keep speaking up, and keep making sure that her school, her community, and her world understood the value of cultural diversity and respect. The day of the school board meeting arrived, and Maya stood in front of a microphone, looking out at the sea of faces before her. The room was packed with board members, teachers, and parents, all gathered to hear her speak. Her mom was sitting in the front row, her presence a calming force, as Maya took a deep breath, ready to share her story. Maya had spent the past few days preparing, writing down everything she wanted to say. She wasn't just speaking for herself anymore, she was speaking for the countless other students who had been silenced, overlooked, or dismissed. She knew this was a pivotal moment, a chance to not only celebrate how far they had come, but to ensure that the changes would last. When Maya began to speak, her voice was steady, her words clear and strong. She talked about her experience with the dress code, the suspension, and the support she had received from her mom, her friends, and even some of the teachers who had stood by her. She spoke about the importance of understanding and respecting cultural identities, how braids weren't just a hairstyle, but a connection to her heritage. "As a student, I shouldn't have to choose between my culture and my education," Maya said, her voice echoing through the room. "Our schools should be places where we can all show up as our authentic selves, where our differences are celebrated, not dismissed." The room was silent as she spoke, every word hanging in the air. When she finished, there was a moment of stillness before the audience erupted into applause. Maya felt a lump form in her throat, overwhelmed by the response. This wasn't just about a suspension anymore. It was about ensuring that every student felt like they belonged, that they mattered. As the applause faded, Maya sat down, her hands trembling slightly. But she didn't feel fear. She felt proud, proud of how far she had come, proud of the change she had sparked, and proud of the fact that her voice had made a difference. When Latoya hugged her afterward, Maya whispered, "We did it, Mom." Latoya smiled, her eyes full of pride. "No, baby, you did it." Maya's heart swelled with emotion, knowing that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. The fight for respect, for equality, for cultural understanding. Maya knew she would continue to be part of that fight for as long as it took. And as the meeting ended, with the school board promising to continue their efforts to make the school a more inclusive place, Maya walked out of the room knowing she had done something that would last. The world might not always make room for everyone, but Maya Turner had just carved out a space where her voice, and the voices of others like her, would always be heard.